All right. It is 10:45. We are ready to get started. If you still need a handout, go ahead and hold your hand up. We got a couple up here. Okay, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and open us in a word of prayer. I think we need it more so than at other times since we're talking about demons this morning. Heavenly Father, we already thank you for the singing and the worship and the preaching of your word this morning. We thank you for the fellowship and the encouragement, and I pray those things will continue to happen even after the class this morning. But now I just pray that you'd give us understanding and wisdom as we talk about the topic of demons or evil spirits. And I pray you give me clarity and thought as I share, and that people would listen and consider these things and how it may relate to their life. And I pray that you'd be honored and glorified more so than anything else. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are going into demons this morning. This will take us probably 3 weeks to cover. You may say, that's a lot of time for demons. Well, there's actually more information about demons in the Old and New Testament than there is about angels or most any other topics for that matter. We'll go places that maybe you haven't considered going to understand about demons. And we've already kind of tiptoed around it a little bit, right? We've talked about idols and how idols are demon worship. We've talked about that one of the things that the Old Testament Israelites would often get into is the worship of demons and interactions with that. And so now we really need to turn our attention to what are demons. So if you were to define it, it is from the Greek word daimonion, which is really just defined as a supernatural being, a spirit, a divine force, a semi-divine being, which means partly divine or partly spiritual, an evil spirit or malevolent force. Demon oftentimes is one of those all-encompassing words, kind of like how we use angel to refer to all the spiritual realms sometimes. Demon sometimes gets used to cover all the evil or rebellious side of things. But usually demon in its very specific focused use of the word is talking about what we oftentimes refer to as evil spirits or unclean spirits. That's what we're talking about this morning. There are a lot of views out there. And so I think any good view regarding demons needs to be able to answer these questions effectively. One is, what is the origin of the demons? Where do these things come from? In fact, if you were to read through the Old Testament and then start in the New Testament, you'd hardly find any information on demons, or at least use of that word. And then you get to the New Testament, it's like demons are all over the place. So where did they come from? What's their origin? How can we define exactly what a demon is? Okay, now, what is it? Is it just a fallen angel, or is it something different? What accounts for their lesser capabilities or power compared to angels? Every single time a demon is presented to us in Scripture, it seems to be less capable than other spirit beings. And so we have to have a view that's going to take that into account. Number 4, what leads to their subordination to Satan? Okay? Why are they specifically called as being subordinated to Satan? This is in your notes, but we're getting there. Okay, next slide will be your notes. Don't worry. And then finally, what motivates them to possess humans and animals? You ever find that odd and bizarre? You never see a case of an angel trying to possess people, yet we have these things called demons trying to possess. In fact, actually, there's an interaction they have with Jesus, and they would rather go into a bunch of pigs than be cast away and imprisoned. And so we need to be able to answer all these things accordingly. So there's 4 views. Okay, you're like, there's 4? I only thought there was 2. No, there are 4 that have been seriously considered and held by Christians over the last 2,000 years. There's the wicked deceased view. There's the deceased pre-Adamic race view, fallen angel view, and then there's the right view, the second temple view. just kind of tipping my hat on my view. So, spirits of wicked, deceased people view. This is the idea that demons are the souls of wicked, unsaved individuals who can roam the earth. They're either under the command of Satan or acting under their own evil will. So likely, this view, we can actually find that it originates with the Greeks back in 5th century BC, and there have actually been Christians who've picked up this view over the years, and even some Jewish sects that have picked this up. Sometimes it's called the ghost view, because that's exactly what it is. We're saying if you have an unsaved evil person and they die, their spirit is released into the world, and now they're out to terrorize people, okay? If you got really concerned when I say it, don't worry, I don't believe that's true, because I think the Bible puts a squash on that, because we always see unsaved dead are always described as being confined to a specific location in the afterlife, okay? So think like Luke 16:22 through 23. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died, and he was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. Now, do I think this is a true story? Well, we could have a whole discussion on this parable, right? Whether it's a true story or not is the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask, would Jesus give us details and make us think something that's not true? And so when you think about it from that perspective, it doesn't matter if it's an actual true story because it's a parable, but Jesus is giving us information that seems to be when we die, angels come along and carry us to wherever we need to go. We're contained, we're taken care of, we're mitigated, so to speak, whether you're a born-again believer or unsaved. Even Revelations 20, Revelation, I can't believe I just add the S to it. I get on people all the time for that. How did I do that? Okay, Revelation 20:13 seems to even believe that all the dead are confined. And the sea gave up the dead and who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead and were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Now you may be wondering, why are death and Hades capitalized? That's a whole other discussion for a whole other class. We'll come back to that someday, Lord willing. Okay, so that view, we're not going to hold that view. It falls apart. Then there's the disembodied spirits of a pre-Adamic race view. Okay, how many of you had a Schofield study Bible at some point in time? Ooh, yeah, I did too. Like I was told when I got saved, it has to be KJV and Schofield, otherwise, you're not really a Christian. I was literally told that. And so if you got an old enough edition of a Schofield study Bible, this is the view in the study notes of the origin of demons, because they'll talk about this pre-Adamic race in there. It got cleaned up later on. Satan originally ruled over a pre-Adamic race of people on a perfect earth. When Satan sinned against God, the pre-Adamic people joined him in rebellion. God responded by cursing Satan and somehow forcing his followers to live as disembodied spirits, which the Bible calls demons. Any of you into that lizard theory, people theory? That kind of goes in line with that, right? You all know what I'm talking about? Yeah, never mind, okay. Because they were created as physical and spiritual beings, it explains why demons want to possess bodies. So it's starting to actually answer questions of why demons have a desire to do that. But the Bible never hints or suggests there is a race of people prior to Adam. And I actually say it ties into people who believe gap theory or something other than a young earth creation view of a literal 7 days. This is a view that sometimes they get involved in. Taylor will really appreciate this. This is from a systematic theology book on Pentecostalism. And this is the view they take. A pre-Adamite race is thought of as existing on the original earth under the governorship of Satan in his unfallen state as the anointed cherub that covereth. This pristine sphere is moreover viewed as the scene of Satan's revolt and the invasion of sin from the moral universe, resulting in an awful cataclysm which reduced it to chaos. See the gap theory stuff, okay? It's Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 1:2. This all takes place between those two verses. The members of the pre-Adamite race, whom Pember describes as being men in the flesh, were somehow involved in the rebellion and in the ensuing catastrophe. You know what I'm saying. Suffered the loss of their material bodies, becoming disembodied spirits or demons. The oft-recorded fact that demons are continually seizing upon the bodies of men to try to use them as their own is taken as confirmatory evidence that demons are disembodied spirits and that their intense desire for re-embodiment indicates that the intolerable condition of being unclothed for which they were not created is so overpowering that they will enter the bodies of swine. Okay, so this is a real view taken from a Pentecostal systematic theology book. That book I got from Dr. Myron Houghton when I took his advanced systematic theology course on Pentecostal theology he taught at Faith. And so this was one of the things that was in that book, which shocked me when I read it at the time. It's like, people actually hold this view. I guess so. And so we should not take this view as being serious either. It falls apart. I think most of us here are probably younger creationists, believing in literal 24-hour days, and so it falls apart from that perspective. If you're not, go to Answers in Genesis and let them straighten you out. Okay? But the one thing here, though, is it picks up on something that is important. Why do demons want to be re-embodied? In other words, why do they want to possess people, okay? And this kind of gives the idea. It's because they have tasted of what it's like to have flesh. They've experienced what it is to touch and to feel and to smell and all the other senses that we take for granted as being human, okay? Now, that's one good thing about this view it's trying to answer, but it falls apart in every other spot. This brings us to the fallen angel view, or this is often, or you could call it the Christian tradition view. This is the view that most Western Christians hold to, whether you're Roman Catholic or some Protestant deviation. And so this is the idea that demons are fallen angels who were cast out of heaven because they joined Satan's rebellion sometime before the fall of humanity. This view is often held by those in the Western church with Christian tradition view of the supernatural. And so the idea is that under this view, they see demons, unclean spirits, fallen angels, which is never actually a term. Fallen angels is never combined in Scripture. Powers, principalities, rulers, and they see all that as just being demon, okay, under that view, without any delineation between that. They might say, well, there's fallen archangels and fallen normal angels. And usually along with this view, you also have to take into some understanding that these angels are then corrupted and punished and twisted so that they lose some of the powers that good angels have. And that's how they typically explain why demons are less powerful and why they're trying to possess people, because they need some kind of body to carry out their will and stuff like that. That falls all under this view. And it falls heavily on Revelation 12, which we've talked a little bit about before, to explain that, hey, there has to be some kind of fall, or this idea that Satan took a third of the angels and they were kicked out of heaven idea. And we'll look at that in a moment. And then the idea is then from that point on, you have good angels and you have bad angels. But let me see, I think I have it in your notes, don't I? Didn't I have that Revelation 12 portion on there? So we'll look at this once again a little more in detail. We've looked at it before, but you have the idea here is that in Revelation 12, the idea is this is describing basically Satan's origin is the idea. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and with agony of giving birth. Well, when you identify the woman, this really parallels Genesis 37, 9 through 11 very well. The woman symbolizes Israel as identified by the sun, moon, and 12 stars, which speak to the 12 tribes of Israel. The woman is about to bring forth the promised Messiah and the birth of the God-man, Jesus Christ. And that seems to be a fairly well understood point of that. But here's where we want to look at in verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. Okay? And so we need to identify who is this talking about, because it seems to be talking about 2 different individuals, and a great sign and then another great sign. So it's 2 different topics we're speaking about. The dragon seems to be Satan, and we get this when we look at verses like Revelation 20, verse 2, and he sees the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. The heads, horns, and diadems speak to the power of Satan has amassed over the nations of humankind by deceiving the heavenly beings overseeing these nations. You can cross-reference Daniel 8:18 through 26. And so what seems to be going on here, as we kind of scroll down a little bit, is that even we see, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So the idea is Israel brings forth a child, which is Jesus, the Messiah. The dragon wants to devour, to destroy. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. That should make us think back to Old Testament prophecy about Jesus taking over the nations. But her child was caught up to God and his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God and in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Well, it's really interesting when you kind of start to look through this. The Messiah is born. The serpent seeks to devour him. This is done in two different ways. Herod trying to kill all the male children, and then the crucifixion of Christ. Caught up to God really seems to play well with Christ's resurrection, his ascension into heaven. And the woman fleeing in the wilderness is God's protection of Israel until Christ's return, right? Which God has preserved in some way, some remnant of Israel all the way to today. Because I think we would all believe here that God is not done of Israel. He will return to working of Israel in the tribulation period in the end times. And so this doesn't fit. The whole point is this doesn't fit a pre-Genesis 3 understanding of what was going on with Satan. And so a better place to put this is really during the life of the Messiah during that time period. Okay? So back to the slides. These are some verses that we looked at from that previous slide. Let me go back here. That's like the demons, unclean spirits. We're going to skip through that for sake of time. So here's, if you like a visual chart, here's kind of what I was just describing. Under the fallen angel view, this is kind of what they say. God creates the heavens and the earth, including angels. Then we have a rebellion that must occur, and it's a must occur on those who hold to this view, because there's no, outside of that Revelation 12 passage, there's no mention of this rebellion and angels falling out of heaven. It just doesn't exist. And so, yes, that begs the question, what did people believe? If that's true, then what did people believe before Revelation was written in AD 95? Okay? We're trying to take things and read it back into the text and try to fit something together. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the topic of Satan in about a month from now. Satan deceives Eve in the garden. Satan and the fallen angels oppose God and his people. And then righteous angels serve God and his purposes. And then Satan and the fallen angels are judged and committed to the lake of fire. And fallen angels would be a synonym for demons under this view. And so the issue here is that there's no other event in all of Scripture that specifically states that 1/3 of the angels fell. And even if Revelation 12, 1 through 6 is referring to such an event before the fall, Revelation is the last book written in the Bible, which means this understanding would not be part of the Old Testament worldview or the apostles, other than John later in life, unless it came from extra biblical context. And so you have to say, where would they have gotten that idea from, if this is true? And I'm going to tell you, they didn't get it from extra biblical context or writings, because you won't find this idea fully fleshed out this way. It's called the fallen angel or Christian tradition view very specifically because it is distinctly Christian and Western Christian at that, and originates from about 4th or 5th century AD, 400 years after the resurrection of Christ. So that takes us to the fourth view. The fourth view is that the Bible records 3 distinct rebellions by supernatural spirit beings. Demons, unclean spirits, rulers, principalities, and fallen angels all result from one of these three rebellions. This view adds weight to the divine council worldview, but it isn't dependent on it. Okay, there's lots of people who don't even know the divine council terminology or that view and hold to the Second Temple view of demons. So the key takeaway, demon does not equal fallen angel in this view. Okay, so if you don't hear anything else, listen to those words. Demon does not equal fallen angel. So let's dig in. So the three rebellions, like I talked about, one is, and we'll come back to this when we get to the discussion on Satan, is the fall of humanity. This was Satan's first act of disobedience or rebellion, however you want to put it. Two, this is the one we're talking about for demons. The sons of God, found in Genesis 6:1-4, these are spirit beings called the sons of God, rebelled by impregnating human women. The children born to them are called Nephilim. When the Nephilim die, their disembodied spirits must wander the earth. Demons, unclean spirits, and evil spirits, which are all the same thing, it's interchangeable words, in the New Testament are the spirits of these human-angel hybrids. The angels who rebelled are currently kept in chains of gloomy darkness that is referred to in 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6. And you're like, how do I pull all this together? That's what we're going to spend the rest of our time on here this morning. So I do want to point something out. If you did pick up a copy of Fallen, okay, Dr. Tim Chafee and I disagree on one thing, on what a demon is. He will hold to the Genesis 6:1-4, and that's the origin of giants, and we'll talk about giants here in 2 weeks. But he doesn't think, he has some weird view that combines the Christian tradition view of demons and the fallen angel view. I think he's wrong. Just, if you read it and you want to interact with it, come talk to me. I'd love to discuss it with you. So I don't even think he's clear in the book. So I have questions about his view because it doesn't add up all the way. But anyways, you probably say the same thing about me on my stuff. Let's look at it. Genesis 6:1-4. Let's read that text. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. And they took as their wives any they chose. Then Yahweh said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. When the sons of God came to the daughters of man and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And so that's the main text that springboards the origin of demons, that second fall there. The third fall we already talked about in the divine council. That's the Tower of Babel outfall. So let's look at the visual chart. This might help kind of put some things together for us a little bit. So you have eternity past. Whoops, where are we at? Eternity past and eternity future, and I have the cross there in the middle. Okay, so kind of dividing humanity up by the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. God creates the heavens and the earth, including angels. And then the very first rebellion happens in the garden. Satan's rebellion in the Garden of Eden when he deceived Eve. Then we have the second rebellion. Angels and humans produce demons or unclean spirits. That's Genesis 6:1-4. If you're nervous about the first Enoch reference, we're going to look at some text here this morning, and I'll explain why when we get to it. Then you have the flood, right? And the flood, what has to have happened so bad to humanity that God would destroy all living flesh, animal and human alike? Well, the Genesis 6:1-4 of angels and humans producing offspring really fits that narrative really well. Otherwise, you're just saying humanity just got really sinful. Well, more sinful than today? I mean, those are some of the questions you have to think through. What was so bad that God decided to do this? Nations are divided at Babel and disinherited to the sons of God. That's the third fall. And so I have the cross there because I'm starting to flesh this out a little bit as we get more chess pieces on the board with demons. There's the war in heaven should probably be placed in the life of Christ. Satan and those who are loyal to him are cast out of heaven at that time. And so then Satan and his followers are judged and committed to the lake of fire all the way at the end of Revelation 20, verse 10. So some of you know this person. I do not recommend reading his book necessarily unless you're, because there's a lot of stuff in there that's questionable. But in The Unseen Realm, Michael Heiser says this: the New Testament is silent on the origin of demons. There is no passage that describes a primeval rebellion before Eden where angels fell from grace and became demons. The origin of demons in Jewish texts outside the Bible, such as 1 Enoch, is attributed to the events of Genesis 6:1-4. When a Nephilim was killed in these texts, its disembodied spirit was considered a demon. These demons then roamed the earth to harass humans. The New Testament does not explicitly embrace this belief, though there are traces of the notion, such as demon possession of humans, implying the effort to be re-embodied. And so that is one of the difficulties of this view. There is no explicit text that says this is exactly how it happens. But that's the problem with all of angelology, is that there's very rarely an explicit text that says this is exactly how it all plays out. You have to kind of look at all the pieces together and build an understanding of what's going on. There's a narrative throughout Scripture on supernatural spirit beings, if you're there to look and pull it all together. This is the time period of when you can see all those four views. You can kind of see the Second Temple view is the oldest view because we have stuff going back into ancient literature that talks about it, and there's overwhelming support in ancient literature outside the Bible even that would support that. The fallen angel view doesn't come on the scene until about 3rd, 4th, 5th century AD. The pre-Adamic race view actually originates all the way back to about 6th, 7th century, and then just never picks up steam other than in some weird circles here and there. And then the wicked deceased view, it has that Greek origin, and people just keep picking it back up here and again, and you'll see people pop up and talk about it from time to time in various places. So if you're just kind of curious where these originate and how far back you can go to trace these views. So we're going to take the Second Temple view. One is, I believe it's truly the view that the New Testament human authors took, and I'll try to attempt to demonstrate that. I think it has the most scriptural support for this view. I think it engages the Old Testament text without having to force a lot of assumptions onto the text. And we're going to take the view because it's the view Pastor Danny took when he preached Genesis 6:1-4. Which was my first Sunday ever here. I was like, wait, that's a good guy. I'm coming here. So the question now is, do demons come from Nephilim? That's the burden that we have to try to prove or pull together here. And so I think I have some text there for you in Genesis 6:1-4. Let's talk about this just a little bit. Let's break it down. So when man began to multiply on the face of the land and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, okay? Sons of God is a term that's used, it's used in other places too, in Psalms, but outside of Psalms, it's used in Deuteronomy 32:8, Job 1:6, 2:1, Job 38:7, Daniel 3:25. And it always seems to very clearly in the context talk about some kind of angelic or supernatural spirit being. And so if every other use of the word is that, to try to make this be something other than a supernatural spirit being, you have a lot of burden of proof that you really have to thrust on this. And there's a lot of people who attempt to say that the sons of God were godly men of the line of Seth, and that the daughters of men were the evil, wicked women of the line of Cain. Okay, that's another popular view out there. He has like 3 chapters on why that's just totally nonsense if you really want to read. I'm not going to go through it in this class. And they took as their wives any they chose, okay? And so we have next, then the Lord said, so this is the pretext to causes the Lord to say this. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever. He is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. So whatever Genesis 6:1-2 means, it caused God to act by declaring he would destroy all of mankind in 120 years in the flood. Or the other view is is that man will only live for 120 years. Take your pick. It really doesn't matter. There's consequences is what is the whole point there. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. So what is a Nephilim? Well, Nephilim, either giants or semi-divine beings who appeared during the pre-flood era. And prior to the conquest period, we'll look at that quite a bit. Some of you may have a study Bible, or if you look up some Bible dictionaries, it'll say Nephilim should be translated fallen one. That has been so disproven so many times, I'm not even going to cover it because you can just do a Google search and you can figure out if that's not accurate. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. So we have an interesting dilemma. Whatever the Nephilim are, they're here before the flood, and according to Moses, when he writes this, they're there after the flood. Did you ever catch that? Okay, so we're going to have a problem that we have to discuss, but we won't just put a pin in that. Remember that. We'll come back to it in 2 weeks. When the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. Okay, so it seems to be the Nephilim are the offspring of what's going on between the sons of God and the daughters of men. To the fact that these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So they are of some flesh is the idea. Let me scroll down here. I think. Uh-oh. Did we freeze? Oh, the arrows work, so okay, we're good. Okay. So 2 things. How did the Nephilim survive? We're going to cover that in more detail in another week. So focus over here with me real quick. And so we're going to look at where else do Nephilim show up. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim. And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. So when they're getting ready to invade the promised land and they send out the 12 spies, they come back and say, hey, there are people of great stature because we feel like grasshoppers to them, okay? And they're even making a claim they descend from the Nephilim and from the sons of Anak. Well, you come here, you look at Anak, if you come down to Deuteronomy 2:10 through 11, they show up another place. The Emim formerly lived here, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim. Well, Anakim are the people group of who Anak is. Anak is the guy. Anakim is his people. They are also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. So we have now a connection that Nephilim, another term that they're called is Rephaim. They're also called Emim or Anakim. So we start to get all these different names for what these beings associated with giant clans seem to be. In Deuteronomy 2:20, it also counted as the land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzummim. That's a name, okay? And so you start to piece all this together and you start to realize, oh, it's not just Nephilim, but you have a whole section of different people groups that are tied into this idea of Nephilim, all the way going back to Genesis 6:4, or 1 through 4. We need to take into account here, what is the purpose of Genesis, or one of the purposes of Genesis, is to fill in the historical gap for the people of Israel coming out of the Exodus from Egypt, okay? And so they're going to be encountering the Nephilim as they conquer the promised land. And so one of the reasons why Genesis 6:4, 1 through 4 is there is to help them relate, hey, where do these people come from? Okay? But we still have the issue is, why are they before and after the flood? So the 2 logical options, but there's more. The flood was only a local flood. Right there, idea, let's throw that out. Number 2, the same kind of behavior happened again or continued to happen after the flood, producing more Nephilim. So did more sons of God come in after the flood and produce more Nephilim? That's a possibility, okay? So as we kind of go back to this, if you're like, I want to know more about giants, we'll do a whole session on giants, okay? I'll even answer an age-old question that people struggle with all the time with that as well. So let's come back to Rephaim for a moment. Rephaim is a Hebrew word often simply translated in modern English versions, like in Genesis 14:5. Did you know Abraham fought giants? Well, look at that. When the term is translated, it is rendered giants or shades. And shades literally means spirits of the dead, or simply the dead. These translation choices point to the interpretive problem associated with the term. It is difficult to identify whether the Rephaim were humans, living or dead, quasi-divine figures, or disembodied spirits. And my answer to the reason why it's so difficult is, the answer is to which one is it? Yes. It's all of them, depending on when you're reading it in the context of the narrative of the Old Testament, okay? So like in 1 Chronicles, and after this, there arose war with the Philistines. Then Sibbecai, the Hushite, struck down Sappai. Man, these Old Testament names, I tell you. You try reading Second Temple literature, it's worse. Who was one of the descendants of the giants or Rephaim? Now look at the context of this, okay? So this is why they translate Rephaim as giant here. And the Philistines were subdued, and there was war again, war of the Philistines, and Ephanan, the son of Jair, struck down Lamai, the brother of Goliath. You see where we're going with this? Goliath was a giant. The Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was again war at Gath. There was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he also was descended from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shemiah, David's brother, struck him down. There were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of the servants. Okay, so there's the use of Rephaim that's clearly should be translated giants. Isaiah 26:14. So remember, Isaiah is quite a bit further along in the timeline than the time of David. They are dead. They will not live. They are Rephaim, shades. So in other words, they're using the Rephaim to say as they no longer exist. It's in the past tense, and they will not arise. To that end, you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them. Job 26. The Rephaim tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. So dead is Rephaim once again. So Rephaim are associated with dead, they're associated with spirits, they're associated with giants. And so it gets very difficult on how to translate Rephaim. And then Proverbs, one who wanders from the way of good sense will rest in the assembly of the Rephaim. Okay, so if you don't have good sense, you're like a giant, in other words, or a Rephaim. Okay, we will come back to more giant stuff later on, but I just wanted you to see how this plays out here a little bit and how demons are associated with giants here in the text. So we're going to look at this here. So there's support for the Second Temple view, okay? It's no mystery that Peter and Jude quote from 1 Enoch, okay, in their passages. In fact, if you're on the Wednesday night Bible study, when we went through 2 Peter, we talked a little bit about that, or Pastor Danny talked about it with everybody. So here's 1 Enoch, and in my full class notes, I walk through all the 1 Enoch text and the Jubilees text. We don't have time for that, so you get the cliff notes. Ready? So here's the narrative from 1 Enoch. The sons of God conspired to produce offspring through human women. And it falls right in line of Genesis 6:1-4. They found them attractive. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They had curiosity about how humans would mate and produce offspring, and they wanted to partake in that. So they take on human form, and they do just that. The offspring, though, and would unexpectedly grow to a size that there's not enough food, so they begin eating animals and humans. And you're like, what's so shocking about eating animals? Remember, pre-flood, nobody ate animals. This would have been shocking, okay? It wasn't until after the flood that God gave humanity permission to eat the animals. Humanity is taught abominable acts by the sons of God and giants. So, ladies, I'm sorry to say this, but according to 1 Enoch and Jubilees, makeup comes from evil spirit beings. Makeup's one of the things that they teach women so that they can dress up and be prettier and more attractive for the spirit beings. Now, how does that tie into 1 Corinthians, the stuff about head coverings? We might talk about that in a future class a little bit. God sends 4 archangels to imprison the sinning sons of God, to destroy the giants, and renew the earth through the flood. And then the spirits of the giants roam the earth. In fact, here's the Enochian text about that. You were holy ones and spirits living forever. So this is God speaking to the sons of God that sinned. With the blood of women you have defiled yourselves, and with the blood of flesh you have begotten, and with the blood of men you have lusted, and you have done so as they do, flesh and blood who die and perish. Therefore I gave them women that they might cast seed into them and thus beget children by them, that nothing fail them on the earth. But you originally existed as spirits, speaking to the sons of God, living forever and not dying for all the generations of eternity. Therefore I did not make women among you. So this is God saying there's no female angels, essentially. The spirits of heaven, and in heaven is their dwelling. But now the giants who were begotten by the spirits and flesh, they will call them evil spirits on the earth, for their dwelling will be on the earth. The spirits that have gone forth from the body of their flesh are evil spirits, for from humans they came into being, and from the holy watchers was the origin of their creation. If you remember back to our section on watchers, watchers is another term for sons of God. Evil spirits they will be on the earth, and evil spirits they will be called. Okay, the spirits of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling, but the spirits begotten on the earth is their dwelling. And the spirits of the giants will lead astray, do violence, make desolate, and attack and wrestle and hurl upon the earth and cause illness. They eat nothing but abstain from food and are thirsty and smite. These spirits will rise up against the sons of men and against the women, for they have come forth from them. And then 16:1, from that day of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, from the soul of whose flesh the spirits are proceeding, they are making desolate without incurring judgment. Thus they will make desolate until the day of the consummation of the great judgment, when the great age will be consummated. It will be consummated all at once. Now, what you should be thinking here is, there's passages in the Gospels where the demons are interacting with Jesus, and they're saying, hey, the time of our judgment is not yet here. This seems to be an allusion to the first Enoch text when they're talking about it, which is not Scripture, okay? Some of this stuff's shocking, right? Like let's not let that pass by. I mean, we're talking about the giants were eating people, and what's going on. I mean, some of the stuff is just shocking the first time you hear it. And so you also have the Jubilees narrative that supports that as well. In Jubilees, the Watcher, son of God, arrived during the life of Enoch's father. Enoch is the first of humanity to write. Why do I put that in there? Because there's a lot of people who think Enoch actually was written. First Enoch, at least the first portion of it, was somehow written originally by Enoch in some capacity. So anyways, they build that view off of Jubilees. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think it really matters. God takes Enoch, that's that Genesis 6 passage, the only thing we have about Enoch. Enoch was not, God took him. Enoch testifies against the Watchers, sons of God. And so that seems to be why God took him. He's testifying to the sinful acts that he's seeing on earth. God punishes the Watchers, sons of God, and their offspring. And actually, if you read the Jubilean text, he actually imprisons the sons of God and then makes them watch as the angels go about slaughtering all the giants and make them watch all their children die. Demons, evil spirits, begin to plague Noah and his descendants in Jubilees 10:1-7. So the flood happens after all that, and then later on, demons start appearing, and they don't know why or where they're coming from. And so then in Jubilees 10:8-14, after Moses petitions God, God takes 90% of the demons that are around at that time and imprisons them, and the other 10% are entrusted to Mastema, which is a name for Satan in Old Testament Second Temple literature. And so that's how they become subordinated to Satan in that view. So here is from Jubilees 10:1-2, so you can kind of see it, a little bit of it yourself. During the third week of this Jubilee, impure demons began to mislead Noah's grandchildren, to make them act foolishly and to destroy them. Then Noah's sons came to their father Noah and told him about the demons who were misleading. blinding and killing his children, which sounds very much like what you read about in the Gospels of people's interactions with demons. So New Testament passages support the Second Temple view. So you see the 2 Peter text, for God did not spare angels when they sinned. Well, when did they sin? There's no explanation given to us by Peter. It seems to allude to this, and it seems to be that he is actually quoting from the text from Enoch, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, see how it's talking about a pre-flood environment? A herald of righteousness with 7 others, then he brought a flood upon the world to the ungodly. Or we can kind of look here at Jude, says the same thing. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Well, you're like, what does this have to do? I don't think we read this portion earlier, but in 1 Enoch 10, 11 through 13, and to Michael he said, go, Michael, and bind Shemhaza, who's one of the names of those sons of God who sinned, and the others with him who have mated with the daughters of men, so that they were defiled by them in their uncleanness. And when their sons perish and they see the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth until the day of their judgment and consummation, until the everlasting judgment is consummated. Then they will be led away to the fiery abyss and to the torture and to the prison where they will be confined forever. And so this is, you look at this and you see the confined to the pit seems to align with what they're talking about in Jude and 2 Peter. In fact, Jude is very on the nose. He actually even references Enoch. It was also about these that Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These are grumblers, malcontents, following their own sinful desires. They are loudmouth boasters, showing favoritism to gain advantage. So this is a direct quote from Enoch as well. Oh, where did we... I just totally messed up my slides here. Let me get back in here. There we go. Matthew 12, 24 through 27 seems to be a reference to Jubilees 10, 1 through 14, which we already read. Matthew 25, 41 references 1 Enoch. I'm going faster because we're out of time. So, Larry, can I get 5 more minutes? Okay. He was supposed to say take 30, but he didn't do it. So, demons expressed concerns related to Enochian events. I mentioned that earlier. Jesus would destroy them. We'll look at the text quick. Mark 1:24. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Okay? And so that only fits with a Second Temple or Enochian context. Jesus would torment them. And crying out with a loud voice, it said, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. For he was saying to him, look how he's appealing to God. The demon's appealing to God. Why? Because in the Enochian events, that's how some of them were left to roam the earth, because God allowed it. They made a plea for that. Come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And Jesus asked him, what is your name? He replied, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he begged him earnestly to not send them out of the country. That's the ones that went into the pigs. We see in the Gospels blindness, dumbness, convulsions, paralysis, lameness, sickness. We'll look at more at what demons can and cannot do with humans next week. And then there's oppression and possession, which is re-embodiment, is another way of putting that for possession. Oppression would be external forces on things. Okay, so we'll end on this. Early church fathers held this view as well. Here's Justin Martyr. The angels transgressed this appointment and were captivated by love of women, and they beget children who are those who are called demons. These angels, then, who have fallen from heaven and haunt the air and the earth, are no longer able to rise to heavenly things. And the souls of the giants, who are the demons who wander about the world, perform similar actions. Athenagoras, 175 AD. Tatian, it is the practice of some men to capture persons and then to restore them to their friends for a ransom. So let's stop right there for a moment. There is a well-documented understanding of a practice of people who would get a familiar, which is a pet demon, so to speak. Who's the pet in that scenario? That's up for debate. But they would then actually, to make money, go and possess somebody else and then extort them for money and then, call the demon back. That's what Tatian is talking about. Similarly, those who are considered to be gods invade the bodies of certain persons. They then produce a sense of their presence by dreams. Then, when they have taken their fill of the things of this world, these gods command them to come forth in the public. In the sight of all, they then fly away from the sick, destroying the disease which they had produced. They thereby restore men to their former state. It's a racket. Origin. The term demons is always applied to those wicked powers who are freed from the encumbrance of a grosser body. Which grosser body would that be? What spirit beings may have had a body? Well, that would be the giants, the Nephilim. They lead men astray and fill them with distractions. They drag them down from God and from heavenly thoughts to things here below. And then Felix in 200 AD, secretly creeping into human bodies with subtlety as being spirits, they simulate diseases, alarm the minds, and wrench about the limbs. They do this so that they may constrain men to worship them. By remitting what they have bound, they seem to have cured it. And then Origin one last time. Among angels, some are angels of God, and others are angels of the devil. So fallen angels, good angels. But among demons, there is no such distinction, for they are all said to be wicked. So that's just Origin saying, hey, he saw demons as being something different than a fallen angel. So that's introduction to demons. Let's close on a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, my prayer this morning is that we would only be looking into and studying demons so that we may not be unaware as to what their practices are. Sometimes we think about the sons of God and we think about the powers and principalities, and really, we don't have much that we can do to combat that other than be living out our faithfully, living out our life in Christ Jesus. But they're dealing with sweeping things, dealing with the whole nations and the world. But demons are something that are very real, and it's something that we can seek after if we were so desired. But Lord, my prayer is that we wouldn't, that we would be sober-minded that they are wicked and they're evil and they will enslave us and enslave our loved ones and our friends. And may we think through this sober-minded, and may you protect us from their evil and from their deceptions. And may we be able to speak into the lives of other people to help them overcome how they might be bound by a demon. And my prayer is that we would use this for your honor and for your glory, and I pray this in Jesus' name.